principle in short. Most women work below their level of competence, and Karen, we can talk about whether that's competence is a good label. On the one hand, you've got this female-male gap in education and in learning generally, and it's a remarkably universal trend. It applies at all levels in OECD countries, this is. And we're seeing now very high levels, particularly in higher education. In this country, in a couple of years' time, there'll be 2 women to every man in higher education. And as I'll show, women go on learning far more than men do, and on most measures throughout their lives. So that's one trend, and that gap is growing. And the point is that that gap is growing faster than the second gap is closing. The gap on pay and careers. Most of the data is about pay, which we're difficult to get in on careers. So there's some convergence early on, particularly for professionally qualified women, but we need to look at all occupational levels. The Paula principle applies at all levels, not just at the glass ceiling type level, and over the full course. So that's really the dynamic that I want to talk about. One or two of you have said, why is it called Paula Principle? This was a very successful book about 50 years ago. It sold 4 million copies, if only. And of course, in those days, the his meant everyone's, but in fact it was his because only men had careers in those days. Peter Principle does have one example of a woman, but the rest are all male. I just thought I'd insert this from the Global Gender Report that was referred to yesterday. I share the reservations about composite indexes. They use 4 dimensions, and it really makes the point because you can see on the right that most countries, and this I think covered 144 countries, that educationally the gap is closed. And in fact, the way the measure is applied, it cannot reflect the inequality that I first referred to. In other words, once it's got to 1, it doesn't go on and turn into a reverse indicator. But on economy, not only is it a long way short of that, but actually the evidence the last couple of years is that it's going backwards. So I think the shaded is the United Kingdom, and the hard line round is the average score for all of those countries. So just, I'm not going to spend time on the data because it's just going to repeat really the points I made, but this is across OECD, which is to show how far ahead women are now becoming across all countries. In fact, they already have in the area of education. This just deals with tertiary education, but if you look at the trends and the changes in all of these countries, the same picture is absolutely true, that women have either overtaken men already or are about to. How that applies in developing countries is another matter. It is happening in some already, but not to that extent. But insofar, when it starts applying, the Paula Principle will come into play there as well as in OECD countries. This is just to drive home that this is European data. This is UK on the right. These are 4 pairs of bars by different age groups, and you'll see that it's again a universal pattern that women go on undertaking educational training at a higher rate than men do. And actually, my label was governor at the Working Men's College. It's pretty much of a misnomer. 70% of our students, a little adult education college founded in 1854. We now have 70% women, and actually of the men that are there, not many of them are working. But apart from that, the college bit remains correct. So that's just driving home that data. I just wanted to stress this point. It's about careers as much as pay and recognition as well as material reward. And of course, I'm very well aware that education is not only about material rewards, it's about a whole lot of other things, both at the personal level and the social returns, the community returns. The ambition is, when we come back to this, what do we mean by ambition? So I'll be asking that question towards the end, as well as what we actually mean by a career. So let's look at the other side now. Again, data, familiar overall. Why I think this is important to include is, first of all, it shows it across all age groups, and you'll see how much the gender pay gap increases it really kicks in the second half of the working life. And also, an absolutely crucial point for the part-time, full-time distinction. And then this is that was UK data, and this is the slowness of the change in the closing of that gap. This is OECD's title, not mine. Pay gaps have changed little, and I think it makes the point. This is just in 5 years to see, in some countries, no change at all. A couple of countries gone backwards, and even where it has gone forwards, it's flattening out. I think I'll leave that one, although I think it's a very interesting one. It shows the difference between two cohorts. We can come back to it in discussion, but it reinforces the point that we can't assume that change is taking place smoothly and progressively. So let me come to what I've called the polar factors, and I think of this as a toolkit. This isn't research results that are saying here it is, and it very much relates to what you were saying about context dependent. Because what I'd like you to think about as I just run through these is how these factors play out in whatever context you're working in or living in or thinking about. And the principle applies very differently across different cultures, across different occupations or economic sectors, within those, across different organizations. And what I'm hoping that the Paula Principle is useful for is to enable us to think about these factors in relation to our particular context. So the first two, actually, I have nothing original at all to say. They're very major ones. Discrimination, which is still covert as well as overt. Whatever it is, 25% I think of pregnant women in this country experience discrimination on grounds of their pregnancy and so on. Caring responsibilities, absolutely major. I certainly don't need to say pass that message on here, but of course certainly in some countries the growing issue of elder care, and that was referred to yesterday. But let me move on now to more I wouldn't say significant, but generate more areas where I think the message is maybe less obviously clear. First is the issue of self-confidence. So I sort of formulated in the course of the interviews I carried out for the book, which is not an academic piece of research. There were 35 women. I wanted to get a good spread, and I did it more or less by a sort of very amateur snowballish approach, and a few men as well. I formulated what I called the 60-20 rule. If men think they can do 60% of a job, they'll say, I can do that, and go for it. If women think they can't do 20% of it, they'll hold back and say, well, maybe I can't. And that's something that emerged just from talking to women, and actually one or two of them, after I'd formulated it, gave exactly that type of figure back to me. But I want to flag up here the question of confidence, self-confidence, is not a sort of unproblematic notion. And I think it's well worth thinking about what healthy forms of confidence are and what unhealthy forms or overconfident forms of behavior might be. The fourth constraint, barrier if you like, is vertical networks. We like to associate with people of our own sex in networks generally. I'm just making that as I think Paul Seabright actually shows this very clearly. It's beneficial to your occupational prospects if you know people at levels above you. I'm not just talking again about top senior levels generally, and because of the way things are at the moment, there are more men in higher positions, and so men are more likely to associate with others above them. So it's not just a question of nepotism, but it's a question of knowing the vocabulary, getting information about what jobs or promotion prospects are becoming available, so on. So the way networks function, because women tend more to operate within horizontal networks, the network function operates. So those are 4 constraints, negative barriers. I guess pretty well everyone in this room would think we should be doing things about them, and some of the discussion has been on that. Now let me introduce the 5th and most controversial one, which is positive choice. So here the argument is, if a woman says to herself, well, I could get that job or that promotion, but do I need the money? Do I need the status? No. Am I quite good at what I'm doing? Am I still growing in what I'm doing? So this isn't a sort of soft option, let's just comfortable life. Yes. So if those are the answers, is it not a sensible decision not to go upwards in the occupational ladder? Seems to me a very sensible decision on normative grounds. It raises all the issues about what's the relationship between constraint and choice, lots of existential issues around that. I live with an existential therapist, so I'm very used to discussing these kinds of issues about choice, but I offer it for your consideration. I like this. The Peter Principle, by the way, was illustrated by a whole load of recaptioned Punch cartoons. And although I couldn't face going through back numbers of Punch to find cartoons suitable, I did commission some cartoons by a very good French woman cartoonist. And this is